Get on up.
Everybody right there.
Get into it.
Everybody right there.
Get involved.
Everybody just come on up. Come on up.
Real people who really care. One of our partners is Peaceprints. We're delighted to be joined today by Cindi McEachon. She's the executive director of Peaceprints. It's an organization that offers comprehensive re-entry services. So we'll be talking about some of the challenges and some of the solutions for people involved in re-entry in the Buffalo area today. We'll be live streaming today's show from our Facebook page, so take a look at facebook.com PPG Buffalo for real-time footage. Feel free to leave a comment or a question on our Facebook page, and we'll try to address it in the short highlights video that we shoot at the end of the radio program. You can find videos from previous week's shows on our YouTube page. So you can find us on YouTube, or you can always do that through the website, ppgbuffalo.org. A couple of announcements for you, some events coming up. Saturday, August 26th, this coming weekend, the Fruit Belt, 99 years in the past, 99 years in the future. An event taking place this Saturday from 12 to 4 at the Moot Center, 292 High Street in Buffalo. Remember where the Fruit Belt has been, imagine what it can be now, an economy controlled by the people, benefiting the people. That's the Fruit Belt, 99 years in the past, 99 years in the future, this Saturday from 12 to 4 at the Moot Center on High Street. Many of our partners and allies and people involved in police reform issues were very frustrated this summer when the Buffalo Police Department pulled out of the Oversight Committee meeting that was supposed to take place in July. So our friends at Open Buffalo's Justice and Opportunity Coalition are having the People's Oversight Committee. That will be an event on Thursday, September 7th from 5 to 8, at 877 East Delvin Avenue, the People's Oversight Committee. So mark your calendars now for Thursday, September 7th, 5 to 8 p.m. for that great event. With that, I want to welcome Cindi McEachon to the show. Thanks for being here, Cindi.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
So, Peaceprints, comprehensive re-entry. Give us a notion of what that means.
Sure. Well, we provide a plethora of services to individuals every step of the way through their re-entry process. And we firmly believe re-entry starts at inception inside the facility. Facilities might not agree, but that's how we feel. And so we try to get into the facilities and initiate contact with individuals early on. Hopefully and ideally continuing that communication throughout their sentence. And
yeah, let's talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Sure.
So what facilities are you able to get into, and what type of services are you able to contact, are you able to make with people who are incarcerated?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. Well, we are in the holding center. So locally, we do go into the jail. Right now, we work with youth that are incarcerated, specifically through BPS. So Buffalo Public Schools, in conjunction with the holding center and Peaceprints, provide some mentoring support services and some employment workshops to these youth with the goal of prepping them for their release back into the community and ideally keeping them from re-entering the holding center situation again.
Right.
That's a transient population. It's very short term most of the time. However, unfortunately, I'm meeting more and more youth that are being sentenced with felonies that will be doing state time. So coincidentally, we tailor a small little workshop inside to those youth, helping prepare them for what to expect when they enter that adult facility, because that's where they're headed.
So talk to us a little bit about the situation of the youth in the holding center. They're housed separately from the adults?
They are until age 18.
And what is that experience like for them? I'm assuming it's pretty traumatic, but tell us a little bit from someone who's been inside.
Yeah. You know, yes, it is traumatic. I don't feel as though the youth have an awareness of the trauma that it imposes upon them when they're in that situation, because it is very normalized, unfortunately. And they're seeing a lot of other peers when they're inside the facility. There's family members. It's generational in many ways, and it becomes, in some cases, a structured, welcomed environment. And that's... It's unfortunate, but it speaks to the overarching epidemic of mass incarceration and how over the last, several years and decades, we've kind of shifted that notion in the sense where it's become culturally acceptable in some communities to go that path. So youth are not necessarily fearing it as much.
Yeah.
My personal feel on that, and this is just me based on my experiences with the facilities, is that our youth detention centers offer a more comforting view for some of these youth when they first interact with the criminal justice system at a very young age. It provides a structure that maybe we don't have prior. We have meals, we have a safe place to be for all purposes, and we have access to adults who care.
Yeah.
And so it becomes acceptable and very comfortable. Eventually we move on into the holding center, but we've already created that stability within that cultural system that's acceptable. And so the holding center is, while it's a little uncomfortable at first, becomes normalized. You fit in.
Yeah.
And like I said, you see peers, you see people that you know, and it becomes somewhere that you don't fear.
Interesting.
And that perpetuates until we hit prison.
Yeah.
Right, and then that's your wake up call. But by that point, it's too late.
Wow.
Right, you're there.
Yeah.
And it's for a fixed amount of time.
So what do we need to do with kids, the 16, 17-year-olds who are in the holding center, to divert them from that, either before they get there or after there? What are some of the solutions?
A lot of it is empowering. What is telling to me is walking into these situations and talking to these youth and hearing their stories, hearing what they've seen, what they've experienced, what they don't have that is taken for granted by so many every day. Many of these youth have this hard outer exterior.
Right.
They come across very angry, very defiant, but when you sit down one-on-one and have a conversation, they're scared. Or they don't believe in themselves, which causes, I'm going to go to where I find stability or safety, and often that is other folks on the street. I get caught up when you hear everybody say that, I'm getting caught up in the streets, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that I personally, myself, experienced in my life, right, in my upbringing, but I'm watching this behavior continuously, and often it's low self-esteem, it's lack of knowledge. I remember I managed a contract at the Center for Employment Opportunities, and I had a youth-based contract, and they were young people on probation, so they had already gone inside, and now they were sentenced, and they're out, and they're under supervision. And I was assisting them in finding employment, and it blew my mind that I had this group of young people who seemed interested, but when I tasked them with going to the DMV to obtain a non-driver ID, because that was a requirement that I had in order to provide service, that they just blew me off. And I got very bothered by it.
Yeah.
So I always tell them I'm going to stalk them, so I continued to reach out to them, trying to get them to follow through with my request, and could not for the life of me figure out why they were blowing me off. Because I knew they needed the service.
Yeah.
And then it hit me. They're afraid to go to the DMV. They've never experienced that before.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do.
Right.
So we took a field trip to the DMV, and every single one of them obtained their non-driver ID and then enrolled in service. And we miss that a lot, and take for granted and assume it's defiance, when often we're dealing with predominantly males. We've got pride that's part of the culture. They're not going to tell you, I don't know how to do that. It's a sign of weakness.
Right.
So you have to have that wherewithal. You have to know.
Right.
And when you empower somebody and walk them through that, it's amazing what they're capable of.
Yeah. That's such a great example, because the DMV, it kind of is a scary place. Really, any sort of bureaucratic government setting has an air of intimidation about it for many people. We certainly see that with new Americans trying to navigate systems like DMV or social services, that it can be very frightening. And if your experiences with sort of government and authority have been negative in the past, whether as a young person or a new American or anyone else, then that really adds to the fear of getting there. What's going to happen, and will I know what to do, and will people make fun of me or humiliate me because I don't know what to do, because I don't know the rules of that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah, a great example.
Exactly.
So wonderful to hear about your work with youth, but I know that's just a small part of
That is a small
Peaceprints.
part.
So tell us,
Yes.
give us kind of a perspective on what else you guys do.
Sure. So on a much larger scale, we work with the adult population. So that's 18 upwards. Right now we have a gentleman who is 78, almost 79. So I mean, really everywhere in between.
Yeah.
We're talking about all different backgrounds, all different stories. Lengths of incarceration differ greatly. I have somebody, I think the longest duration we've had pass through is 47 consecutive years, down to first-time offender who did 1 year and is out, with post-release supervision. So completely the look of our housing on the outside and the services we provide on the outside, that's transient by the population. Inside the facility, you can say same goes. We provide support groups inside the facilities. We're in 9 facilities, more or less in the general region. Facilities by nature tend to be placed in very rural communities, so none of them are very close or accessible unless you have a vehicle and lots of time to drive there. So we have a phenomenal group of volunteers who make the commute to these facilities every week. They go through the whole processing, go in, and they actually lead support groups inside the facilities. These support groups have been around since the Attica riot and are a direct result of the riot. First group was in Attica.
Wow.
We call them CFIS groups, and they are a very comforting environment where you have the community coming in to talk about everyday issues. Now, everyday issues inside a prison world, which is not necessarily the same as issues that we might think of.
Right.
And they see these same individuals weekly. Volunteers, like I said, coming in, so they establish that trust, that rapport, and they're really able to hone in on some of the behavioral issues with the men and women that we see because we've built that relationship. So we can kind of see consistency, we can see certain behaviors emerging or thought patterns that maybe aren't natural or aren't normal, and we can kind of try to talk through them and offer other alternatives on how to handle situations. They're voluntary groups, both for our volunteers that go in, as well as the folks that participate from inside the facilities.
So you've got some weekly support?
Weekly support
Groups going on in 9 different correctional facilities?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And then we added to that, and what I found is a gap area, when individuals are set to be released from a facility, again, regardless of your duration of incarceration, you have the option of taking what's known as phase 3. So there's 3 phases of incarceration. Phase 1 is your intake, welcoming you in, if you will, use that loosely. Phase 2 would be your programs that you have to take. So you're actually enrolling in the mandatory in-prison programs. You'll probably get a job potentially at that point. You might be working on your GED or something of that nature. And phase 3 is when you have an out date. So you know you're getting released. Somewhere typically within about 90 to 120 days, you're going to know you're getting out, and roughly when. You have the option, mind-blowing that it's optional, to take phase 3, which is your re-entry aspect. Now, this particular programming is facilitated by other inmates who have been inside for various amounts of time and haven't been in the community. So it is only so effective because of the model and the way it's set up. However, what I was finding is that individuals were coming out to work with us and had not been given appropriate information, not intentionally sending them in the wrong direction, but because nobody knew. So they come out and, it's very discouraging to hit the natural barriers you're going to hit and have misleading information and not feel overwhelmed and cause somebody to take steps backwards. So we did approach the facilities and kind of pitched an idea, which are currently operating in 3 facilities right now, and that's because I am personally the one that goes in and does it, and I can only kind of hit so many timing-wise, but we do re-entry workshops. So they're full-day crash course workshops geared to phase 3, prepping them. And I'm seeing guys, right now we're only in the male facilities doing this, but we go in the female facilities for the support groups. Giving them a crash course on what to expect. Things that are useful no matter where in the state they're going. Because truth be told, of the class of 30, probably 5 on a good day are coming back to Erie County. The rest are going all over the state.
Sure.
And so we really had to tailor this workshop to hit all of the major information pieces that folks would need to help them keep steady footing once they get out, knowing that I may never see them again or hear from them again. And so we started doing that as well, and that's been going on for about 1.5 years. It's very effective. The classes are growing, and they know when I'm coming, despite the fact that they're getting, you know, good, bad, and ugly mixed into that one day. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to tell them what they need to know.
You're listening to The Public Good here on WUFO AM 1080 and now 96.5 FM. We're talking to Cindi McEachon. She's the director of Peaceprints, which offers comprehensive re-entry services, and we're talking about some of the issues that face people going through re-entry. Cindi, so the one-day workshop that you offer, give us sort of the highlights of it. What's the key advice for folks who are about to re-enter?
That life is not fair, and if you go out expecting that it's going to be fair, you're sadly mistaken. And I hate to be the one to break that news. We talk about the fact that, and everything else is kind of based off of it, but that we have this mentality. When you're in prison and you talk to somebody who's formerly incarcerated, they can, generally speaking, 9 out of 10 times tell you down to the minute, sometimes the second, they were incarcerated. They will tell you that. That's mind-blowing to me, the amount of mental time we think about our release, we plan for our release, assuming that when we get out, life's going to be fabulous, right? But you're leaving one massive dysfunctional system, but it's massive, and it is created to meet all of your most fundamental needs. So you might not like it, but you eat, you have a place to sleep, you have clothes, right? And you have a predictable routine. You become comfortable. That's all part of the system. And then you're released. And you're released to a community that does not care that you were incarcerated, that does not understand your routine way of thinking, that is no longer guaranteeing you those needs. And it's not one system, it's several siloed systems required to meet your needs, and you have to navigate it. That's very difficult. And that in and of itself is the essence, that you need to really fully understand how that is going to affect your ability to think. And if you have a history of criminal thinking and tend to move yourself into a certain direction and thought pattern very quickly, you are going to enter systems that are going to push those limits. And we have to talk about reactions and think future thinking, just some elements that we don't talk about or think about often prior to release. And then you come out and you're in it, and it becomes very overwhelming very fast.
Let's talk about some of those kind of key obstacles that people need to surmount. I'm thinking housing, employment, and health, especially mental health. So let's kind of go through those a little bit. So housing, what's your advice to folks re-entering about housing?
That upon release, often individuals feel as though they could meet somebody on the street. I could meet you on the street and you could offer me housing, and I'm going to pick that over going to a transitional residence such as this Nut House, which we have. And I would challenge that thinking, because that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to receive, you know, or have a positive experience. Be open to the providers that exist. I tell all individuals coming out, one of the skills they develop inside is how to read people. We keep it very simple, good, bad. You can tell the difference between good and bad. And you're very good at it, right? Use that skill when you get out. As you meet providers, as you talk to people in the community, read them. Are they genuinely good or bad? And if they are good, use them. That's why they're there, is to help you. And don't be afraid to have that help.
And what is the availability of transitional housing for people coming out of reentry? Is there, is it like a lottery, or?
It's not a lottery. So when you're released from prison, parole determines your residence. You do not choose. So I could have an individual write to me and say they want to come to this Nut House, and parole, for various different reasons, could decide, no, you're not going to Bissonnette, I'm going to send you here instead. That's really up to the discretion of the parole officer at any given time. And so that's the one area, it's housing specifically, that parole has full reign on. And whatever address they approve is where you are to live. Without approval, you cannot move, or you're violating the conditions.
So how does that work? How does the parole officer make that determination? What's the interaction like with the inmate?
There's no interaction with the inmate prior to release. So what happens is when you are hit into that phase 3, quote unquote, timing, you will submit addresses. You submit them to your ORC, they call them, offender rehab counselor inside the facility. That person is almost like your in-prison parole officer, okay? So they're going to then fill that out into the computer, send it to your local officer. When they hit 90 days out, it goes into that facility, whatever your local office is that you're being released to, and you'll get designated a parole officer at that point. So once that information comes over and you're given the officer, they have access to your list of addresses. Then it's up to your parole officer to visit those addresses, call on those addresses, look at your particular story. Is this a good environment, a bad environment, and make that determination.
And so if you're the inmate, how do you generate that list of addresses? Like, how do you know about places like Bissonnette House? And
word of mouth.
It's all word of mouth?
It is. You know, when I first came on as executive director, we talked about increasing our marketing as an organization. I didn't necessarily agree with that concept, because one of the things that I had learned over the previous 7 years kind of working with this population in other capacities is that I could have the best pamphlets and the best flyers. They are meaningless. It's relationship, it's word of mouth, and at the end of the day, for every 2 successes, you might have had 3 failures. Now you can peel away the layers of those failures and find successes built in, but they still needed another go around, right? Or another go around happened, unfortunately. And so when they go in, they talk. It's word of mouth, it's all talking. And so we get a lot of individuals writing to us, not because they've met me, not because they know me, but because people talk. And you know, that's word travels. And so it's really interesting.
So when you like do workshops and are advising inmates, what advice do you give them about lining up a place? Like what's the best way to go about it? Just
There's a couple little things that we talk about that are pretty important. If it has anything to do with your case, don't offer it, because you're not going to stay there, and that's a fact. It's not going to happen. Picking a random woman is also a very bad decision and likely not going to happen. If anybody else in your family was formally on parole or under supervision or is currently under some sort of supervision, the answer will be no, so you're wasting your time. There's some pretty important things, right? And you know that ahead of time. And so we talk about that, you know, really think about who it is that you're going to offer the address for. Often they're talking to family members, either written communication, or via phone calls, and so they try to line up addresses that way. But again, we're talking about generational incarceration, so often what we find is that you have other family members that are currently under supervision or were, you know, recently, and which one's getting released first, that's the one that's going to get the housing approved, and the other person now has to find somewhere else to live. And then the support networks as a whole aren't always the most solid and intact.
Now let's switch to public policy for a minute, but stay on housing and ask you the question, what do we as a community need to do better to more effectively house people doing reentry?
You know, we have to be open-minded. We assume as a society that anybody who has gone to prison is inherently a bad person. And I would challenge that through and through, and often actually get asked, are you afraid? Are you afraid of your job? And I can probably count on 2 fingers, actually, the number of times that I ever felt uncomfortable interacting with somebody. I am way more uncomfortable interacting with people in the community than I am with the folks sitting inside the facilities. And, you know, that's unfortunate. And so we need to lose that assumption and understand people first, that every single person deserves an opportunity to succeed. And often, as we continue to close doors and it gets narrower and narrower, they're going to fall.
Yeah.
Right? So as housing, landlords, whether we're talking about low-income housing, alternatives for individuals, we need to up our game. We need to provide quality housing opportunities for individuals that they can afford, understanding that you're coming out without a lot, right? And they should be safe, clean, and affordable. Just because you've gone to prison doesn't mean you need to live in the slums.
Yeah.
But we as providers need to do that as well. Reentry as a whole, bigger than just what we could do on a policy issue with housing, we need to talk about policies surrounding this notion of reentry. There are no standards of service, and I feel like I just say this over and over again because it really gets to me. There is no standard of service for this population. So in the hierarchy of need-based populations, you've got, elderly individuals, folks with disabilities, folks with mental illness, you have children, you have those various levels.
Keep going.
At the very, very bottom, you have individuals who've been incarcerated. They're the bottom feeders. So the standards that have been developed for all these other need-based populations have not been developed for ours, which means provider to provider, there's no checks and balances.
Interesting.
So, that's what makes things very difficult, is that reentry is the buzzword, it's what we're all talking about, but we haven't actually set foot inside a lot of these providers or these facilities, these partners, to really see what type of service they're offering.
Yeah.
And instead, individuals are forced to either go to them and have horrible experiences. It's the policy discussion is so large, because it's a bigger piece, a bigger element we're missing. Before we can improve a specific area, we need to improve the whole concept and the understanding in the community of what that means.
Right.
And right now it's not there.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
To what extent in the Buffalo area are landlords doing criminal background checks? Is that fairly universal, or are there a lot of places that still don't do that?
Independent landlords tend not to. Some do. But typically your independent landlords will not be doing those. That tends to be, we have a housing coordinator on staff, and she tends to target a lot of times the independent landlords because you can build a rapport and a relationship just like you would with an individual. You're gonna build that with the landlord and then try to assist them in finding a good connection, in affordable housing for an individual. But your big box low-income housing providers, they do the background checks.
Yeah.
I myself used to work for Belmont Housing way back when, and it's just part of the process.
Yeah.
Every application, I did a full credit and background check, and it would flag, for so many years back.
Yeah.
And those are deterrents. I appreciate that the state shared how they're going to focus on opening up and lessening the discrimination against individuals with convictions, but that's just a real fun dog and pony show, and at the end of the day, it doesn't actually trickle down.
Yeah.
So the barrier for our individuals is that if you are in fact turned away purely because of felony, which is very high chance in those situations, you have to prove it. And how are you going to do that when you need a place to live? You probably don't have a lot of access to resources, and I'm just going to guess that handwriting the letter that you have to then mail to them to appeal is not going to be the first thing you're thinking about, or maybe even know how to do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pieces that they've built into that process of appeal that in and of itself is a barrier.
Right.
So I think it's great that they've talked about it. I don't necessarily see a change.
Cindi, I want to make sure we let people know where they can find Peaceprints and Bissonette House if people are interested in your services. What's the best way to get in contact and to learn more?
Absolutely. So our administrative offices are located at 660 Smith Street, and that's in Buffalo, 14210. Website is www.peaceprintswny.org, and you can also find us on Facebook at Peaceprints WNY. All very accessible ways to reach us. We have info on our website that you can send us messages that way. But yeah, definitely. And you can also just Google Peaceprints. People do that all the time, and that's how
All
they
right.
find us. I hear that a lot. I just Googled Peaceprints.
Yep, good way to do it. All right, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights today and for the great work you're doing at Peaceprints. Cindi McEachon, Director of Peaceprints, was with us today. Next week on The Public Good, we'll be talking to John Washington from Push Buffalo and Rob Galbraith from the Public Accountability Initiative about the proposed rate increase by National Grid. So if you're concerned about possible rate increases to your electric bill, you're going to want to tune in next Tuesday at 1 p.m. to The Public Good here on WUFO AM 1080 and FM 96.5. Thanks.
Everybody over there.
Get on up.
Everybody right there.
Get into it.
Everybody right there.
Get involved.
Everybody